I graduated, got my PhD. Got my doctorate here last year, and it's just really wonderful to be here and be on the campus. And it was great to have lunch today with several of the faculty, including two who sat on the committee for my oral defense. Now, my doctoral studies was concerned the philosophy of history, historical method, and the resurrection of Jesus. Specifically, I know that about 3,300 academic sources, that's journal articles and books, have been written on the topic of Jesus' resurrection since 1975. Dale Allison, somewhat of a skeptical New Testament scholar, refers to the topic we're discussing this evening as the prize puzzle of New Testament research. And so this is a really important topic we're discussing this evening, and it has garnered a lot of attention from New Testament scholars. But they all disagree so much on this, and I wondered why. And then I wondered how many people who did a thorough historical investigation on the resurrection of Jesus had actual training in the philosophy of history and historical method. And you go around and you look at the course catalogs in most universities and their bachelor's, master's, and doctoral level courses in the departments of religion, and you add up all the courses offered for the students in the Department of Religion, religious studies in the philosophy of history and historical method. And let me tell you, it's rare as hen's teeth to find them. Which means you get a lot of biblical scholars getting out of school with their doctorates, calling themselves historians of Jesus, and they haven't had the first course on how to do history. So what I wanted to do was to find out how professional historians outside of the community of biblical scholars did their work, and then apply that to the resurrection of Jesus and see how it differed. And it was just amazing. It really was. It was a lot of fun. And so when Dr. Craig asked me to be his debate partner on the topic of the resurrection of Jesus, at Tufts, I can't tell you how thrilled I was. So, Dr. Craig, in his opening statement, defended two major contentions. The first is that the text of the New Testament teach that Jesus' resurrection was a physical, historical event. And number two, there is no good reason to deny this traditional understanding of the texts. Now, I listened very carefully to what Professor Spangenberg just offered. And he didn't dispute any of the four facts that Professor Craig offered. So he didn't dispute Dr. Craig's first major contention, that the text of the New Testament teach that Jesus' resurrection was a physical, historical event. That wasn't contested at all. So, Dr. Craig's first contention stands. The second contention was by Dr. Craig, there's no good reason to deny this traditional understanding of the text. Now, Professor Spangenberg's first three objections were, number one, the four Gospels, the fourth one teaches forgiveness that plays a large part, and sacrifice was not part of Luke's Gospel. The second one concerns the Apostles' Creed, and says the teachings, a lot of the teachings in the Apostles' Creed, differs from what you find in the Gospels. And third, the Trinity was introduced by Theodosius the Great. And I wondered, what's the relevance of any of those to tonight's topic? I might as well just talk about some lectures I had the other evening at Hodges at the Northwest. It'd be just as relevant. These have nothing whatsoever to do. They're all red herrings. Now, a red herring is a logical fallacy that comes after, is patterned after the sport of fox hunting, in which a dry smoke herring that's red in color is dragged off the path and into the woods to draw off the scent of the hounds. In logic, a red herring is an interesting argument, but it's irrelevant. And if you're not careful, it's going to drag you off the path, your attention. I mean, you could be here and going, oh, that's really interesting. Wow, well, what about that in the Apostles' Creed? And do the early Gospels, do they teach differently in the New Testament text than with the Apostles' Creed? It's irrelevant. It's an interesting question. It's a different debate. And we've come here this evening to discuss the question, how should we interpret the New Testament text regarding the physical resurrection of Jesus? So I want to ask us to be careful. We can discuss this after the debate if you want. It's a neat topic, but it's irrelevant for tonight's debate. So don't be a dog and be drawn off into the woods on irrelevant topics, or else you'll give Professor Spangenberg something to bark about. that science has overturned this. Gosh, you have, like Professor Craig said in his opening statement, you better tell a lot of good scientists about this. For example, George Ellis, who teaches at the University of Cape Town, has been described as knowing more about cosmology than anyone, even Stephen Hawking. Christopher Isham, a quantum cosmologist at the Imperial College of Science and Technology in London, has been called Britain's leading quantum cosmologist. Francisco Ayala, one of the leading evolutionary biologists in the world. Alan Sandage, who is probably the greatest living astronomer. Francis Collins, the head of the Human Genome Project. All these prominent, prestigious scientists have two things in common. Number one, they're theists. In other words, they believe that God exists and acts in our world. Second, they're all Christians. So tell them that science has now put to rest the biblical worldview. It seems to me that the only way that Professor Spangenberg can make such an assertion is that he's so caught in with the myopic view of his skeptical subculture that he's unaware of all the other things that are going on in science today. And by the way, this is just worldview considerations he's giving. As Dr. Craig said in his opening statement, it has nothing to do with historical considerations. One thing I learned as I was studying the philosophy of history and historical method is that there's no such thing as an unbiased historian. And in my doctoral research, that was the hardest thing for me to overcome. Because I realized that I had a bias. I wanted the resurrection to be true. I wanted to show it through historical research. And historians are very careful about this and saying, listen, even in non-religious matters, you have to do your best to detach yourself from your desired outcome while your inquiry proceeds. We're all biased, given our race, gender, ethics, nationality, our religious, political, philosophical convictions, the way we were raised, the academic institutions we attend, the very group of people whose acceptance and respect we desire. There's just no way around this. Everybody is biased. And so we have to take steps in order to bracket our personal worldviews and biases while we're engaged in our historical investigation. And the reason this is important, ladies and gentlemen, is because if Jesus rose from the dead, then I think we're all probably in agreement that God's the best candidate as the cause for Jesus' resurrection, and theism obtains. So, what Professor Spangenberg in his opening statement did was seem to argue backwards in terms of history. I don't believe that God exists, therefore Jesus couldn't be raised from the dead. I suggest that if we're going to look at this as responsible historians, we need to look first at the evidence and neither presuppose God's existence nor a priori exclude it, but adopt a position of openness and let the facts speak for themselves. Otherwise, we place ourselves in the dangerous position where we allow ourselves, our historical investigation, to be guided by our worldviews, and bad philosophy corrupts good history. So, in concluding, Dr. Craig's two major contentions, the text of the New Testament teach that Jesus' resurrection was a physical historical event, and two, there's no good reason to deny this traditional understanding of the text. Both stand very strongly because we didn't hear a thing from Professor Spangenberg that should cause us any alarm concerning either of these two contentions. Thank you.